If you were to design and build the ideal health club, how would you do that? Would you make it available and affordable to everyone throughout the state, regardless of income? Would you have it be open year-round and offer a variety of activities geared to the seasons and to all age levels and variety of interests? Would you create opportunities for individual and large group activities? Would you include educational offerings? And would you build in silent places for meditation and contemplation? Would you consider the health of the environment in addition to the health of the individual users? And would you have it be owned by the users themselves? Well, we already have such a health club. It's called the State of Minnesota, and its facilities and natural resources are some of the best in the country for health and recreation, and much more. We're going to talk about the natural resources that the state has to offer on today's episode of A Public Health Journal. Please stay tuned.
Welcome to A Public Health Journal, a program that explores public health issues facing our society today and tomorrow. The host of the show is Dr. Ed Ellinger, Commissioner of Health for the State of Minnesota. A Public Health Journal is sponsored by the Minnesota Department of Health and the Hennepin County Human Services and Public Health Department, all working together towards the goal of healthy people living in healthy communities.
Welcome to A Public Health Journal. Today we're going to look at how the natural resources in the state are being managed and used to improve the quality of life for all Minnesotans. Joining me in this discussion is Tom Landwehr, Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, or DNR. The Minnesota Department of Natural Resources is a Minnesota state agency charged with management of the state's natural resources. The DNR oversees the state parks and trail systems, regulates hunting, fishing, off-highway vehicle use, timber harvesting on state lands, mineral extraction, and a whole lot more. Tom, welcome to our program. We've got a lot to talk about with that kind of broad portfolio. But as I was thinking about this show, and I'm thinking about the definition of public health, what we as a society do collectively to assure the conditions in which people can be healthy, you certainly and your agency have a lot to do with those conditions. Do you think about the parks and trails and natural resources in that kind of capacity?
Well, thanks for having me, first off, Ed. DNR, we're responsible. We really have two broad areas of responsibility. One is sort of managing the assets. So as you mentioned, the state forests, the minerals, the state waters. And the other is outdoor recreation. So think state parks and trails, hunting and fishing, and those sort of outdoor activities. And surely when we think about the outdoor activities, we're thinking about, the well-being of people. People recreate not for a bunch of esoteric reasons. They recreate because it's fun, it's healthy, it's interesting, and it gets them out of their sort of daily grind. So very definitely when we're thinking about how to provide outdoor recreation, we're thinking about the experiences people are going to have and how to give them the best experience we can.
How did the Department of Natural Resources evolve? I know when Minnesota became a state 150 some years ago, we had a lot of natural resources. And at what point did the state start to say, we need to pay attention to this? And how did your department develop?
It really goes back quite a long ways, and maybe not surprisingly, the earliest genesis of the department was actually a state game warden. If you think back to the state being settled, statehood in 1858, the early Minnesotans, extracted a lot of value, a lot of wealth out of the state, both in terms of the timber and the farmland and the critters, fish and wildlife. So there were no regulations in the mid 1850s about how much you could take, hunting or fishing, and we found that eventually, people were taking too much. So many things like bison disappeared. Passenger pigeon, of course, everybody knows went extinct, and so there was a push by essentially sports people saying we want to put some regulations around hunting and fishing so that we can have better experiences in the future. So 125 years ago, in March, the first state DNR employee, the state game warden, was hired, and that really launched the beginning of the department. Sometime later, 20 years later, we had massive forest fires. Remember the Hinckley fire and the fires we had up in International Falls and so on. A result of sort of unmanaged timber harvest. A lot of forests were just slicked off and all the brush was left on the ground. A dry year comes along, we have massive fires that burn down whole towns. And so in 1911, I believe it was, we had the first state forester hired. And so over the years, different divisions have been added to the department, and with the responsibilities we've got now, the department's been pretty much the same since I've been with the DNR for over 30 years.
So it sounds like as needs evolved and people started to recognize it, this makes sense sense for the Department of Natural Resources.
Yeah.
Now, recently I've been seeing some ads on general television about, camping and hunting and fishing, sort of a PR thing for, when did you get into that kind of promotion of activities, the various things within the state parks and forests and trails?
And this goes back a long ways. Itasca State Park might be one of our oldest parks, and that's over 100 years old. Parks were set up once upon a time back in the late 1800s as a public health amenities, a place for people to go out. People were already concerned in the 1890s about sedentary lifestyles, people being indoors and not getting out. So parks were being set up, and we set up a state park system. But what we have found, when you and I were kids, there were 4 TV stations. They were black and white. You had one TV in the house, and mom and dad kicked you outside. We spent a lot of time outdoors just because there was not much to do indoors. But you look at what's happening today, and we're becoming more and more urban. People are living in the cities. There is round-the-clock indoor activity for kids these days. So they've got 150 TV stations, many of them tailored to kids 24/7. They've all got the Xboxes. I've got a 14-year-old son, a 12-year-old daughter. They all have the electronic games. Parents are sometimes concerned about letting their kids play outdoors for fear of things that might be out there. And so what we're finding is that it's harder for kids today, even for adults today, to sort of pick up the skills that you and I would have picked up just because we were outdoors a lot more and people were spending a lot more time outdoors. So we've created these programs in partnership with other entities to really show people how easy it is to be outdoors, how easy it is to camp, how easy it is to fish, how easy it is to hike. We did some research to look at what was barrier to people camping, and surprisingly, 3 things were. One is that people were afraid of wild animals. Well, if you spend any time camping, the biggest thing you have to worry about is a raccoon getting in your food.
Or a mosquito.
Or mosquitoes, yeah. Well, and we can't help you with that. That one's going to be there. The second was that they didn't know how to put up a tent. The third is they didn't know how to start a fire. Really low hurdle types of activities. So we create a program in partnership with REI to give people a chance to get outdoors and go camping for the first time, find out what an easy activity it is, and break the ice for them so that they'll start to take this on themselves.
Well, it reminds me of the influence of a family. How did you get involved in natural resources? I mean, you're now heading this agency, and you've had a long experience of dealing with outdoor kind of things. How did you get involved in that?
And my guess is that my experience is similar to the way a lot of people did in sort of our generation. Hopefully that will continue in the future. But it's parental. My dad was a big outdoorsman. He raced canoes. He was a hunter and an angler. Took the family camping and so on. And Mom supported that, and so we did a lot of family vacations out to national parks and so on. And so at a very early age, I was exposed to that, and went through my turbulent teens, as many of us do, but realized when I got into my 20s that I really enjoy being outdoors. I really enjoy hunting, fishing, canoeing, camping, biking, swimming. And so as I'm looking around for careers, realized that when I went to the university that I could actually get a career in fish and wildlife management. So got a bachelor's and master's in wildlife management, ultimately went and got an MBA as well. But it's just, it says we're always advised when we're looking at school, find what you love to do, take it on as a career, and you'll never work. You'll always be having fun.
I'll be having fun. Good. Well, we're going to be talking about some of the fun things that happen in the state of Minnesota, but first we need to take another little break.
Very good.
We'll be back right after this message.
Take me fishing and show me how to drive the boat.
Take me fishing, because my wedding will be sooner than you think.
Rediscover the joy of boating and fishing. Visit takemefishing.org.
For fishing opportunities in Minnesota, visit www.dnr.state.mn.us.
Welcome back. We're talking with Commissioner Tom Landwehr from the Department of Natural Resources. Tom, in a lot of the materials from the DNR, you really focus on the quality of life. And what does that mean to you, and what does that mean to your agency as you're saying we need to improve the quality of life?
Well, I think it means a lot of things. I mean, first off is just the place we live. What is the place we live like? You know, when you think of Minnesota, Minnesotans are really just very proud of this water, you know, forests. We've got these vast forests in northern Minnesota. We've got abundant and clean lakes and rivers, and that really, in many people's minds, I think defines what it is to be a Minnesotan. So our quality of life, I think, reflects the fact that we have an abundance of these natural resources. But it's more than that as well. It's the access to these natural resources. So people can go out and you can there's 3,000 public accesses in the state where you can launch a boat. You know, there's 5 million acres of state forest where you can go and recreate. You know, we have 1 million acres of wildlife management area where you can go hunt, and we've got, you know, abundant blue ribbon fishing in the state. So the quality of life is not just the resources we have, but it's the opportunity to go out and enjoy those resources. And I think when you look at why people move to Minnesota, certainly there is a lot of value in the industry, the businesses that we have here, and the institutions, the educational institutions, art institutions, and so on. But people love the outdoors. When you look at our quarter, it shows a loon and it shows the Northwoods, iconic Northwoods scene on there. When you talk to people about what they're going to do in the summer, they're going up to the cabin, you know, up to the lake. It is really those resources and the access to those resources that provides the quality of life that I think makes a lot of people willing to endure our winters.
Yeah, well, and I like the fact that it's the cabin or the lake, as if that is the one and only it's my personal one. How do you see it relating to the health of people? You know, in my world, you know, trying to improve health. How do you see your connection to that?
You know, I think in your world, Ed, you know, we look at what are the crises, the health crises of the times, and it's diabetes and obesity, right? I mean, things that are directly related to how much people move, you know, what's the activities they're doing. And when you think of outdoor recreation, you think of the types of activities that the department is sponsoring, they are things that make you move. They are paddling a canoe, they are hiking, they are tenting, camping, they're hunting, fishing, biking. They're all those things that, you know, it's great to get out, but when you get out there, you do something as well. So I think the real connection there is the types of activities that we allow people to do, we encourage people to do when they get out and into those natural resources.
Well, it brings up the fact that most people, when you think about what contributes to health, they think of hospitals and clinics, but that's really only about 10% of our health is related to that. The rest of it is related to our behaviors, what we choose to do, and the environment in which we live. Yep. And so it's nice that's why having you on here, you're one of our partners in trying to create health. And in your world, who are the partners that you have? Because you are dealing with a lot of things that overlap other agencies, other disciplines.
You know, one of the very rewarding things about this job is that there is a vast network of stakeholders and stakeholder groups in this business. So when you think of outdoor recreation, it is all of the friends groups associated with the state parks. It is the trail associations. You know, we have 21,000 miles of snowmobile trail in the state managed by volunteers. The state has an oversight role, but 21,000 miles maintained by volunteers. Advocates that work with biking organizations, for instance. You know, I think of the Root River Trail and all of the communities that are just really thriving as a result of that trail system. So the communities themselves are key allies. And we work very closely with the federal government and with other state agencies as well as county governments and local units of government. So just a broad network of nonprofits, local units of government, and businesses too. I mentioned REI as a partner on some of our ICANN series. So it's really just a huge network of support.
Well, and I know that, I mean, this afternoon we're going to go to an environmental quality board. So you have a lot to do with the environment. And so you're working with Ag, the Department of Agriculture, and pollution control, and
health.
And health, and economic development. And how do you interact with those agencies, and how do you partner with those groups?
You know, when you look at the responsibilities of the DNR, you know, they are to manage the state's assets, the state's natural assets, so our forests and our minerals and our waters. There's a lot of overlap with respect to water. The department is responsible for managing essentially water quantity. So we do a lot of work with flood damage reduction, for instance. We do a lot with dam safety. We do a lot with water appropriation, you know, municipalities taking water. But Pollution Control Agency is more responsible for water quality. So they work with regulations related to pollution and so on. And health, of course, works with wells and safety with wells. So we collaborate a lot in those areas and work together in a lot of those areas. So it's a sharing of responsibilities.
Yeah, and I suspect agriculture, which has also a lot of land that it's
Right.
responsible for, how it interacts with the resources that you have, and certainly in terms of how it affects waterways.
Right, right.
And then the other partner is the federal government. You know, we have national scenic waterways and national parks. How do you interface with the feds?
Again, it's a very close relationship with certain departments. So we work very closely with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, for instance. We work very closely with the Corps of Engineers, work closely with U.S. Geological Survey, the National Park Service. National Park Service, of course, we have one national park in the state, but we've got lots of wild and scenic rivers. So the St. Croix River, the Mississippi River through the cities are national parks. So we work with them on managing those resources, very closely with the Fish and Wildlife Service on managing wildlife habitat, managing populations of species like ducks or trumpeter swans and things like that. So we work, at the staff level very closely with many of these federal agencies on managing these joint American resources.
And then how about funding for your agency? I know hunting licenses and fishing licenses and things like that. Where did the bulk of the funding to do all of the things that you do come from?
You bet. It's a changing ratio, if you will. You know, we looked 10 years ago, 40% of our funding or more came from the general fund, you know, which just state income taxes are appropriated to various departments around the state. And the rest of it was what we would call dedicated funding. So hunting and fishing license fees, boat registrations, you know, some portion of the gas tax. Today, 18% of our budget is general fund, and the balance comes from the special fund. So the good news is that we are taking less and less of the general fund, and the bad news is when you have those dedicated funds, they're very restrictive in how they can be used. So some of the things that we do that I would argue have broad general public benefit, like managing water, like managing state parks, like managing state forests, we're finding ourselves in a budget pinch because the general fund dollars are drying up. So these assets that belong to the public at large, we're having a harder and harder time getting funding to manage. Whereas on the other hand, you know, we got a hunting and fishing license fee increase, as you know, last year. We're going to be able to manage those hunting and fishing resources fairly well for specific constituent groups who are paying for it, but the general assets of the state are sort of taking a little bit of a hit.
Good. Well, I want to talk about some of the specific issues that you're dealing with, but we need to take a little break.
Okay.
We'll be back right after this message.
If you enjoy Minnesota waters, help stop the spread of aquatic invasive species. Steer clear of aquatic plants. Clean plants from your water intake, impeller, and trailer. Run your personal watercraft engine for 5 to 10 seconds to drain. Rinse hull with hot water, spray with high pressure, or dry for at least 5 days.
We're doing our part to protect the lakes.
Welcome back. We're talking about Minnesota's natural resources with Commissioner Tom Landwehr, the Commissioner of the Department of Natural Resources at the state level. Tom, you were talking about the funding, and earlier on you had talked about urbanization. I'm wondering, is there sort of a changing attitude about natural resources and about recreation, and which leads to the support or not lack of support for what you're doing in your agency?
Well, I definitely think as people become more urbanized, or as we have become more urbanized, the attitude about natural resources changes. And think of it, when we were a much more agrarian society, when people worked in the countryside, managing lands, managing animals, they have a very utilitarian approach. As people become more and more urbanized, they lose that sort of, direct connection with, managing livestock and land, and it becomes more of a recreational thing. You look at forests as being a place to recreate, not as a place to get jobs and timber. You look at waters as being a place to recreate, not as a place to generate electricity or so on. So I think there is that shift in mentality, and people now, it's a little bit of educational effort to make people understand that, you know, we can manage forests with timber harvest, and it's good for the forest. It prevents, you know, blowdowns and bug infestations and fire, and we can manage the waters and still use it for generating electricity or whatever. So it's the educational effort that we have now is to make people understand that these assets, you know, really sound conservation means using them wisely. It doesn't mean not using them, it means using them wisely. But we still find that there's huge support for natural resources. You know, as we mentioned, people still take great pride in the Great North Woods and the Great Lakes and the Great River, and so it's a different perspective, but people still, you know, still embrace those resources. And as exemplified by the 2008 vote on the Legacy Amendment, 61% support for the Legacy Amendment, largely an urban population.
Yeah. Well, and also you see the people who are, you know, thinking green, sustainability, and then you have the business interests, and certainly things like mining. Right. You know, where jobs, but it does have an impact on the environment. How do you deal with those kinds of controversies where you have groups that are really sort of diametrically opposed to what's going on in a certain area?
Well, you know, one of the sort of luxuries you and I both have is that there is a rule book for how to be a commissioner. It's called Minnesota statutes. So when we get into these controversial issues, we are not without some guidance. So the law tells us what we can allow in a mining situation, for instance, what we can allow, talks about the public process, and truly the discretion of the commissioner is fairly limited. If a project is proposed that meets state standards, you know, I'm obligated to approve it. If a project is proposed that doesn't meet state standards, I'm obligated to deny it. So you know, we have as a society built a system in which we are safeguarding our resources while allowing some economic development. So we've had that debate. It's codified in state statutes.
Mm-hmm. So what about some of the other controversies? We hear a lot about invasive species as one. I mean, it's not controversial. It's just like it's a big issue. How do you deal with it? Or wolf harvesting is certain. Now there's a controversial one. So how do you do those where they may or may not have, you know, statutes that say this is what you have to do?
You bet. You know, and one of the things that I find very true in this job is everybody has an opinion about natural resource management, and everybody thinks their opinion is the right one. And so one of my jobs is to make sure we listen to as many people as possible, ultimately make the right decision, or try to make the right decision. And again, it's always about balance. It's about sustainable, in my mind, it's about sustainable use. It is how can we use our resources for the benefit of this current generation without undermining the ability of future generations to enjoy those resources as well. So to the extent, you know, the law guides us on our decision making, that's great. When we have to go beyond that and decide, you know, okay, the law doesn't tell me here, what's the best course of action? That's the measure I look at, what is the best sustainable use we can have.
Yeah. The other thing in preparing for this, really, it's understood, you have a lot of educational activities, you know, and it sort of is how to get people out into the environment and use it properly. I mean, you have things like education about water safety and ice safety. Tell us about some of the safety things that you're dealing with.
We do a lot of that. When you look at the range of those safety programs, they're quite large, and our objective, of course, is to put people in the outdoors in a way that is safe. So we have hunter safety training. You know, right now, if you want to take up hunting, anybody born after 1979 has to go through a firearm safety training program. It's dramatically reduced the number of incidents of shooting and injury and fatalities, frankly, from hunting as well. Now it's safer than high school football. We have educational programs on, as you mentioned, on water safety. So we have a program largely played out in the media to advise people to wear a life vest. You know, the one that I love so much is don't let your brother-in-law get your boat. You know, wear a life vest. You know, most drownings happen because people are not wearing a life vest. And in most cases where people have an accident, fall in the water, if they have a life vest, they'll be fine. So it's you know, really a public educational process about what do you do to be safe in the outdoors? What do you do to be safe riding an ATV? What do you do to be safe going on ice? And every year, you know, we put the same materials out in December saying, here's the safe depths for ice, for walking, for driving, for whatever. So it is, you know, this is one of those areas, those educational efforts that the department has taken on and been given by the legislature to make sure that people know what they can do that is still safe and avoid those areas that are unsafe.
Mm-hmm. So what do you see as the challenges that are facing you as you try to say, all right, what kind of legacy am I going to leave after my years as Commissioner of DNR? What are the things that really you'd like to highlight?
You know, there's a few things that I look at as being sort of timely with respect to where we are in history. And one is, again, going back to this idea of getting people outdoors. You know, there are very clear trends in outdoor participation, and on a per capita basis, those are going down. Fewer days per person camping, for instance, fewer days per person fishing. And I just think that's an unhealthy trend. I think people being outdoors is something that's good public health. Yeah. It's good for our mental state, and it's good for our natural resources, because when people know about natural resources, they care about them, they vote that way. So we very much are trying to work with our partners to boost recruitment and retention of outdoor users. Water quality. You know, water, I think, is going to be one of those big issues in the next 100 years nationally that we're going to be wrestling with. And so how do we safeguard our quantity and our quality of water, and how do we make sure that it's still biologically sustainable? How do we have healthy fish populations, for instance? So I think water quality is one. And I think a third big one for me is grasslands, preserving our grasslands.
Okay, good. Well, there's a lot more that we could have talked about, and I'll have to have you come back, but this is just fascinating. Thanks for all of this information.
Thanks for having me.
Good. And I'll be back with a closing comment right after this message. A community, like an individual, is a living organism whose health is a result of complex web of factors, events, and history. What makes a healthy community? One in which you'd like to live and raise your children, one that nurtures your spirit, one where you'd be willing to grow old? Well, the World Health Organization defines a healthy community in part as, quote, one that is continually creating and improving those physical and social environments that enable people in developing to their maximum potential, end quote. This definition reinforces the fact that there are many components to making a healthy community, but that an essential one is a healthy natural environment. And a healthy natural environment doesn't happen by accident. Laws and regulations that restore and or preserve clean air and water, preservation and creation of open space, natural beauty, and wilderness, restrictions on the use and disposal of toxic substances, conservation of natural resources, including plants and animals, all help contribute to a healthy natural environment. And a healthy natural environment enhances health and reduces stress, provides an aesthetic experience, and affects community life for the better. Minnesota is blessed with a natural environment that is hard to match, and it adds a lot to our quality of life. But what we enjoy today is not of our making. It is due to the investment of the people who lived here long before us. Their investment in the future has given us a wonderful place to live, work, learn, worship, and play. Our job as good citizens is to do the same for our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. So let's leave them a legacy that'll help assure that all Minnesotans have a high quality of life far into the future. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. I hope you can join us again next time on A Public Health Journal.